Improving your CO2 tolerance, how do you do it? And importantly, why is it something that you should be considering to improve your athletic performance and recovery? I'm Jacko, Master Instructor and Mentor with the Oxygen Advantage, and this is my YouTube channel where I share with you insights behind all of the breathing protocols and techniques that I utilize with my coaching of elite and international athletes and teams to improve their physical and mental performance and recovery. In today's video, looking at CO2 tolerance because it can be such a key performance parameter if you've never changed it before, to increase your capacity to control your breathing, as well as using it as a way to increase things like our lactate tolerance and lactate clearance. And I'm going to give you two very simple but very effective exercises that you can incorporate into some of your training to really take your CO2 tolerance to new heights and start to train like the pros. Before then, we jump on the assault bike, which I'm going to use to show you these two exercises to improve your CO2 tolerance. Let's have a look at that important why, because I always feel that with the athletes that I work with, when we understand why we're doing something, our ability to apply that effectively is improved, and you're going to get better results from the work that you do. So it's important for me that I help to educate you so you understand why it is that you're doing one or both of these two exercises, and then hopefully you're going to be doing them an awful lot better. One of the reasons why improving your CO2 tolerance will help improve your exercise performance and capacity, particularly at higher levels of intensity exercise, is that carbon dioxide is one of the primary breathers of our stimulus to breathe and inhale. Now, a lot of people are starting to get on board with this concept, but there are other factors that go into what is driving our respiration. But CO2 is a large one. And when we are able to improve our tolerance to be able to tolerate higher levels of CO2 circulating in our blood and in our lungs, then we see our ability to control our breathing response is better, and that will play out into some more efficiencies of our breathing that we'll see when we go through the practical element. The other thing that CO2 does when it's within the bloodstream, it increases the acidity. When we utilize some of the breath holding techniques, which will be in the second exercise that I give you, we'll be able to see from the literature, scientists called Xavier Warons, and we're using breath holds to increase levels of CO2 within the body. At the same time, levels of oxygen, because you're holding your breath, are going to go down. What we've seen in Xavier Warons' research is that time and time again, we see an increase in lactate threshold and lactate tolerance when we're utilizing some of this CO2 tolerance training with the utilization of breath holds to increase that amount of CO2 within the body. When we increase the amount of CO2 within the body and spend some time there doing exercise with that increase, the body is naturally adapting to those high levels, and therefore we build up our tolerance. Some of the literature is also pointing out towards this interesting little relationship that CO2 and lactate has. When we increase levels of CO2 within the bloodstream and within the tissues by doing high amounts of work with breath holding, there seems to be a blocking effect almost from the CO2 on the lactate. So we get this increase in lactate, not just from lower levels of oxygen within the blood and within the tissue when we're doing our breath holds. The increase in CO2 also sort of keeps the lactate within the muscle tissue, and we see increases in that like buffering ability of the body at a cellular level to improve our lactate tolerance, as well as the body's ability to clear and buffer it. The breath holding exercise that we're going to do, I'm going to use it on the assault bike for the purpose of this, but because some of the adaptations that we're looking to improve here are happening at a cellular or tissue level, making the exercise that you're going to do specific to the exercise or the sport in context that you want to get better at. So if I'm a runner and I don't want to get better at being able to tolerate on the bike, then I'm actually going to go outside and do this whilst running, or do it on a treadmill in the gym whilst running. So make it sport specific, because the adaptations are happening at those muscles to a degree, and therefore one of the bits of sort of conclusions from Xavier Warons' work, he draws out that the more sport specific that we can make it, then the better those adaptations for that given sport, which hopefully is quite obvious and simple and rational to understand. If I want to get better at doing it with this particular sporting movement or type of intensity, then I want to do it at that particular sport or type of movement and the type of intensity. That brings me to my final point on the why, is that there is some popularity in practicing breath holding techniques or CO2 tolerance work that say free divers might do, where they'd be doing it static, so not actually moving. And one of the things that doesn't particularly carry over as well as doing it during exercise is that it's not sport specific. If I work on my breathing whilst I'm sat down, I can get better at breathing whilst sat down or lying down. If I do my breath holding sat down or lying down, I can get better at my breath holding in those positions. But because there's so many different factors go into our respiratory drive, things like the mechanoreceptors around our lungs, the rib cage, the diaphragm itself, as well as our psychological relationship with that sensation of feeling out of breath, and any habits of breathing that we've generated through the course of our life associated with different movements and different exercise intensities, then there's a number of things that are going into what's going to drive your breathing and drive that sensation of wanting to breathe that we're trying to get better control of by increasing our CO2 tolerance. It makes sense that I want to do that work and that breath control and utilize these two exercises I'm going to show you in a sport specific or exercise specific environment for yourself and the intensity that you're working at. So yes, you can improve your CO2 tolerance by doing static breath hold work, sat down or lying down, but you're probably going to get better at static breath hold work rather than getting better at improving your CO2 tolerance and your breath control at certain intensities of exercise that you want to be able to achieve. So there is some literature showing that like sat down or lying down static breathing exercises can help improve someone's breathing during exercise, but the vast majority of the consensus and what is, I guess you get what you train for, the specific adaptation to imposed demands is a very simple foundational principle within strength and conditioning where you essentially get what you train for. So if you practice these two exercises we're going to go through in a sport-specific scenario and an intensity-specific scenario for you, building up progressively, then that's going to give you the best sort of bang for your buck or best carryover into being able to like breathe better, do higher intensities of work that you want to be able to achieve in that given exercise modality or sport. So I hope that contextualizes why we are going to be doing these two things. Let's now jump on the assault bike behind me and let's get practical and let's give you a little demonstration of two very simple things you can do to improve your CO2 tolerance, which is going to improve your breath control and your capacity to do greater amounts of work if you do your homework. Okay, so let's get busy with the physio. Let's start doing some homework. Exercise 1 is going to be doing some work where we restrict our breathing to nasal breathing. When you use your nose rather than your mouth, those two smaller little holes are going to provide some restriction to the airflow. That restriction to the airflow is going to reduce the speed of your breathing and overall reduce the volume of air that you're going to be able to ventilate in a given period of time. So rather than using that big hole where you can get more air in and out. Now, this becomes important because if I'm breathing a little bit less air in and breathing a little bit less air out and the CO2 leaves on the exhale, then I'm actually going to be keeping more CO2 inside of me by restricting that airflow a little bit by choosing to breathe through my nose. A couple of key things that will help you with your nasal breathing. There's a whole series on nasal breathing during exercise and why you may do it and where your limits are, etc. But for the purpose of this, you're going to have your tongue to the roof of your mouth, and I want you to think about breathing backwards rather than breathing up your nose, which will help you with activating the diaphragm a little bit more. That diaphragm or the tongue is a connection fascially between your nose and your diaphragm, so they're linked through the tongue, and that helps with the airway and all the good stuff. So tongue up, breathe back rather than up, and you'll get a little bit more activation from your diaphragm rather than when you breathe up your nose, you get a little bit more coming from here. What we're going to do is provide that restriction. We're going to work for 30 seconds on, 30 seconds rest. So I would be tongue up and breathing backwards. I would work hard. I would work hard by breathing only through my nose. Notice that feels a little bit restrictive, but the intensity that I'm going to work at is going to be manageable, that I can actually get to the end of those 30 seconds and I don't feel like I'm completely drowning and completely out of breath. So that ideally, during the recovery period, I can still breathe nasally, 30 seconds up, and then I would go again. So essentially we do 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, nasal only. That is going to give you a little bit of work at an intensity that is manageable for you. Slightly more CO2 in the body because it can't leave as quickly because you're choosing just to use your nose. Don't make the intensity so difficult that you feel like you're drowning or suffocating. It wants to be, okay, a little bit of a challenge, but I'm not at my absolute limit of what I can manage nasally. In time, your tolerance is going to build up, your breath control is going to build up, and you'll gradually notice that, like, okay, if for me, when I started this, it's like 65 RPM on the assault bike feels okay nasally. And then the next week it's 70, the next week it's 71. You progressively increase that intensity as you allow your body to adapt. Our second exercise then is going to be utilizing an exhale breath hold. So I'm going to breathe in, breathe out, pinch the nose, or I don't actually have to pinch the nose, but for the purpose of the demonstration of this, I'm going to pinch my nose and then I'm going to progressively try to move and sprint a little bit harder, or choose an intensity of work that allows you to do at least ideally about a 6-second breath hold, 5 or 6 seconds as a starting point. So if you go a little bit slower, the 5 or 6 second breath hold isn't going to be too bad. If you can go a little faster and you want to get better at tolerating lactate and CO2 at higher intensity exercise because you're a high rocks athlete or something like that, choose an intensity of work that is mimicking the type of intensity of work that you're doing or that you're trying to get better at doing. Okay, we will be doing these breath holds every minute initially to start with. There are protocols that I progress people through where that rest period becomes shorter, but as a great little starting point for this, you're going to do a breath hold every minute. And so if I do a breath hold for 5 or 6 seconds, I'm going to have 55 or 54 seconds rest. As you get better, you can increase the duration of your breath hold, and you can actually hold your breath for 7 seconds, 8 seconds, 9 seconds, 10 seconds. If you can do round bouts of this, reps of this, 10 seconds is a really nice marker to build up and aim towards. You'll be able to do more, but little warning, the first rep is obviously easy because it's off the back of you're at rest. Yeah? So you don't want to just, you don't want to shoot your load too early, let's say. So hold a little bit of powder on your first rep, because rep 2, rep 3, rep 4, I'm going to encourage us to try 5 repetitions of this. You're going every minute, so it's going to take you 5 minutes. But I've then like a 2-minute active recovery rest, and you're invited to do a second set of 5. So it would look something like this. I'm nice and relaxed. I can be padding very, very gently or completely static. I take a breath in, breath out, hold my nose to hold the breath. Let go. If I can, rather than, oh God, that was hard. Try to regulate your breathing. Try to breathe through your nose if you can. If you can't breathe through your nose, at least try to regulate the speed of your breathing when you're breathing through your mouth. And I did a 6-second breath hold then. So I got 54 seconds. And what I encourage you to do is use those 54 seconds wisely to get yourself back in control. Control the speed of your breathing. Try and get back to nasal, because that's going to allow you to be a little more composed, a little bit calmer, regulating that nervous system that is linked with our breathing so that you feel ready. I've got 15 seconds to go again. Then I'd have my second rep. I'll do another one for you as a little example. So let's come up to 55. On 57, I breathe in, breathe out. I try to regulate my breathing with good mechanics. So I'm filling from the bottom up, utilising my diaphragm to draw that air in. Regulate the speed of my breathing. Get myself back to nasal, or do it all nasal. If I can. That way I'm training that little bit of nasal threshold work, the nose providing a little bit more resistance. That's keeping that CO2 in a little bit more, even during my recovery. But it's building up that tolerance. And the resistance is also giving my breathing mechanics a little bit of extra work to do. So I'm strengthening my inhalation and exhalation musculature. That is going to carry over as a little like side bonus to your training. So the recovery periods is often a hugely overlooked piece within this type of breath hold training, because you get a lot of the adaptations whilst you're holding the breath. But when you're recovering in between each one, that's where you get to change your habits, change your psychology towards what feeling out of breath actually feels like. That's where you get to practice, can I regulate my breathing when it's being really demanded of me? When my breathing is demanding like a lot of me, my respiratory drive being really strong, because I've just held my breath and CO2's gone up and O2's gone down, I feel like I want to breathe fast. When you feel like you want to breathe fast, where does it go? Inefficiently into the upper chest. That's going to be faster because it just takes a much smaller distance. And the mouth, little resistance, means it can come in super fast. Whereas my auto response in a stressed environment of holding the breath and sprinting on a bike is going to want to be that. But I want to change my response. I need to be able to control that urge. I need to be able to slow it down so it can come more diaphragmatically, drawing air into the lower portion of the lungs. That distance is much bigger from my airway, from here, whether it's my mouth or my nose, from the airway down to here, it's a further distance than just to my upper chest. So that distance is going to take a little bit longer, only a little bit, but it means that I need to slow my breathing relatively to how out of breath I feel, but slow my breathing a little bit to allow a depth of breath that is then filling the lungs more effectively and efficiently, and oxygen is going to get extracted from my lungs into my blood more efficiently. And there's a lot more literature coming out. A big researcher in America, George Dallam, has done lots of good studies on this, and I can put some references in the description below for the doubters out there that don't realise that actually we've been missing a trick with this. Training your breathing is something where we're leaving money on the table. We've never trained it before. We can actually make some really good change, and we can see some really big improvements. These are two exercises that I program for almost every elite, professional, international athlete that I have the pleasure of supporting with their breath training and their conditioning. An important safety factor for the breath holding is if you have any underlying heart conditions or medical conditions, then it's not recommended that you are trying to utilize breath holding during physical exercise, just as a bit of a stressor on the heart. We know that is if you are used to doing high intensity exercise and you've got a clean bill of health, these are totally safe and amazing stimulus for your training. That's just my little safety warning. We can start ourselves off just to make things nice and simple for us. If 2 sets of 5 reps on each of those exercises. So just a little reminder, the first one was nasal only, 30 seconds on at an intensity that you can manage, and then 30 seconds rest. Do 5 reps of that. It's going to take you 5 minutes. Have a couple of minutes rest, active recovery, really gentle. Practice working on your breathing during that recovery period. Then you can do a second set. That's the invitation. A second set of 5. It'll take you another 5 minutes. So that would take you 12 minutes in total. Similarly with the breath holds, you exhale, you hold the breath. You don't have to pinch the nose. That was just for the demonstration. The second rep I didn't pinch my nose. Just close off the airway. Choose not to breathe after you've exhaled. And then you sprint an intensity that you can get to at least sort of 5 or 6 seconds on the breath hold, and or that's related to the type of intensity you're trying to get better at tolerating CO2 and lactate at. So make that sport specific. So the intensity being sport or exercise specific, as well as the modality of how you do these. If you do them running or cycling, assault bike, skier, rowing machine, choice is yours. Just make it specific to what you want to get better at. You hold your breath every minute for 5 minutes. That gives you 5 reps. Again, 2 minutes active, really gentle but active recovery. And then the invitation is for a second set of 5. You're going every minute, so it takes 5 minutes. But that again is only going to take you 12 minutes to do. So they're short and sharp sessions, but being very specific, and don't forget about those recovery periods. That's where a lot of the money is, in changing your psychological response to that feeling of being out of breath, and you get to work on strengthening and controlling better breathing mechanics. There's a whole series that we're going to be doing on breathing for efficiency, breathing for recovery, that will encompass all that. But this gives you 2 great exercises to get started with and experimenting for yourself. I hope you found that helpful, and if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love you to click somewhere below here to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the other videos that I am producing. Now I'm going to be putting an awful lot more of my content. Long form YouTube allows us to be educational, allows you to learn, rather on Instagram where it tends to be a little bit short and sharp. This has given us the chance to really educate, understand, and then implement some of these things into our own training. So I would love to hear from you. If you find this helpful, let me know in the comments below. Once you've had a chance to integrate it into some of your training, giving it a go. I also would love to see or hear comments of any particular topics around breath training and conditioning that you'd love me to cover, whether that's from a conditioning perspective, whether that's from a mobility and movement perspective, or anything else at all. Let me know in the comments, and I would love to hear from you.